Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. We're going to go through the practice that was included on your note set from yesterday. So we talked about the concept of taking a quadratic and working it through the quadratic formula. And sometimes at the end we end up with these complex answers. So the three problems that you see here, that's what they're going to do. We're going to end up with some complex roots. I just want you to see that and practice it a little bit before we move on to the next topic with complex numbers. Okay. So what I would recommend that you do for this particular day is pause the video, try the problem, and then play the video and see how you did. And do that in between each problem that we do here. Okay. That'll kind of give you a sense of, hey, do I know how to do this? What kind of situations is Mr. Weldon running into that maybe I'm not familiar with? Okay, so here we go. So we're going to take a look at this first problem. Like I said, we're going to do the quadratic formula on all three of these things and see what we end up with. So we need to be able to find A, B, and C here. Go. So A is going to be 1. That's the number in front of x squared. Right? We don't see a 1, but it's always implied that there is one. For this one, b is the number in front of x, so this is going to be a negative 1. And c is going to be the constant on the end. That's going to be a positive 1. All right, then I'm going to set up my quadratic formula. So I'm going to have a negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4ac, right? So 1 and 1 all over 2 times a. Right, so a is just 1, so I'm just going to put a 2 down there because 2 times 1 is just 2. All right, and then I start going through and I simplify little things that I can simplify. So I'm going to start here. I have a double negative going on, so that's just going to turn into a positive 1 plus or minus the square root. Negative 1 squared turns into a positive 1. Again, when you put that into your calculator, make sure you put the parentheses around it. This will be 1 minus 4, because 4 times 1 is just 4, all over 2. And then I'll start working to the side here. So we'll get 1 plus or minus, and then inside of that square root, we get a negative 3 all over 2. And then you see where the complex number is going to come from here. So right now we have a complex number in its square root form. So I'm going to put that in its complex form. So I'm going to say 1 plus or minus I root 3 over 2. Okay, and you can just leave your answer just like that. That's all I need right there. There's no more simplifying this. The 2 and the 1 don't divide nicely, and this certainly doesn't divide nicely, so we'll just leave our answer. We can see our two complex roots right here. Okay, let's try another one. So if you want to try this one on your own, hit pause, and then we'll pick back up. All right, so here we go. We've got a equals 1, b equals 6, and c equals 25. Again, I'm getting those coefficients that are in the polynomial. Now I'm going to set up my my quadratic formula. So I've got negative 6 plus or minus the square roots, and this will be 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25 all over 2 times a. And again, a is 1, so it's just going to be a 2 down here. And then I go through and I simplify, so that's going to stay a negative 6 plus or minus, and then inside of the square root we'll get 36 minus, and then 4 times 1 times 25 is 100 all over 2. Okay. We'll work to the side. So we've got negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 64 all over 2. There we go. So this, we see our complex number again here. We got the square root of a negative. So I'm going to put this into its complex form. So this will be negative 6 plus or minus. So I kind of think the negative comes out as an I, and then the square root of 64 is an 8. So this is going to be 8I over 2. Now this one can be simplified a little bit more because the 2 goes into the 6 and the 8 here. So if I do negative 6 divided by 2, I get negative 3 plus or minus, and then I do 8 divided by 2, I get 4I. And those are my two complex roots for that one. Okay, you don't have to separate them. I'm okay with you just leaving it as a plus minus. All right, let's do another one. This one I'm going to do a little bit differently. I'm actually not going to use the quadratic formula on this one. Instead, I'm going to take this 3x squared plus 48 and set it equal to 0, and I'll just straight up solve this one. Okay, so I'm going to start by subtracting 48 from both sides. That way they cancel. So all that's left over here is 3x squared, and over here we have a negative 48. Okay? And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So the 3's cancel, and we get x squared equals negative 16. And then I will square root both sides. So the square root and the square cancel. And then over here we'll get the square root of negative 16. So that'll be plus or minus 4i. Okay, so in this case, my two roots would be 4i and negative 4i. Okay, so that one was a little bit different. We didn't actually need the quadratic formula for that one. All right, let's go to the next page. And this is just some practice with simplifying complex numbers. So sometimes they start in their square root form. Sometimes they're already in a complex form, but they just need to be multiplied, and we need to handle the powers of I. Okay, so let's start with number 1. So the square root of negative 81. So remember, we can split that up to be the square root of 81 times negative 1, right? And then I can split that up even more. So I can say the square root of 81 times the square root of negative 1, and this will turn into a 9, and this is I. So this becomes 9i. Okay. So there we go. All right, now this one, we have a fraction, and I'm looking at the 2. The 2 does not divide nicely into the 3, so we're going to leave this one in its fraction form, but I'm going to take this square root of negative 25, and I'm going to put it in its complex form. Okay, so this will be 3 plus or minus 5i over 2. Okay, and again, the 2 doesn't go into either one of those nicely, so we'll just leave our answer like this. All right. All right, let's look at number 3. We've already got some i's going on here, and notice in between the parentheses we've got some multiplication, so we're just going to be multiplying everything together. So I'll do the 4 and the 3, the negative 3 first, so that gets me a negative 12, and then I'm going to do I times I, which is I squared. Okay, and you have to remember your powers of I. I squared is simply negative 1, so really this is just negative 12 times negative 1 in disguise, and when I do a negative times a negative, I get a positive. Okay, so there we go. All right, moving on, we've got another one just like that. So I'm going to multiply the numbers first, so I get an 18, and then I do I squared times I, which is I cubed. And if you remember the previous lesson on powers of I cubed is simply negative I. So this would be 18 times negative I, just like that, which we can just write as negative 18I. And that's how I would leave my answer there. Okay. All right, so get number 5. All right, so again, we have one of these weird fraction things. The complex part is right here, right? So I need to turn this into a complex number. So I'm going to say 16 plus or minus the square root of negative 64 is going to be 8i, right? Because the square root of 64 is 8. The square root of negative 1 is I. And this will all be over 2. Now this one, the 2 does go into the 16, and it does go into the 8. So I'll do this first. 16 divided by 2 is 8, plus or minus, and then 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I will say 8 plus or minus 4i. And there we go. All right, let's look at number 6. So kind of a mixture of things here. I'm going to start with the square root of negative 16. So I've got negative 2i squared. I'm going to leave that alone for right now. And then over here, the square root of negative 16 becomes 4i. Okay, so now I can start multiplying. Well, first I have to do the exponent, right? So I got to take everything inside of this parentheses and square it. So when I do negative 2 squared, I get a positive 4. And then I do I squared, so I'll have I squared. and then I'm multiplying that by 4i. So now I can do 4 times 4, which is 16, and I squared times I is I cubed, and we know that I cubed is the same thing as negative I, so this becomes negative 16i. Okay. So that would be my fully simplified answer. All right, guys. Hopefully that helped out with just kind of clarifying how to do some of those problems. We'll be working on some new topics with complex numbers in the next lesson, but for today, just a little bit of practice, a little bit of watch me do it, then you try it so that you can get some of those finer skills ironed out. All right, guys, have a great day.